From his newly published book to 526 to offshore drilling, I sit down one-on-one with Dana Beach of the Coastal Conservation League for a special edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And be sure to download the free Quintin's Close-Ups app in your Apple or Google Play stores. And listen to this interview later on the free Quintin's Close-Ups iHeartRadio podcast. Dana Beach.
Good, Quintin.
How are you?
I'm fine. It's great to see you.
Likewise. I know we were just talking off camera, and you were up in New York City with a friend who had its 60th birthday.
I did. In fact, a former board chair of ours, and we went to an Irish play. Everybody at the birthday party. It was great fun.
Yes, indeed. And now here we are back in Charleston. And I know that just recently on November 17th, you sent an email out to all of your particular followers, and you said this, quote, "Folks, some of you have asked whether you were dropped from my folks' email list over the past year. You were not, as demonstrated by the fact that you're reading this email. I'm the only one who dropped out of the circulation temporarily, having turned Conservation League's executive directorship, obviously, over to the eminently capable Laura Cantrell. I've had the privilege of working with Virginia on the history of the organization, from its founding in 1989 to the present." Can I stop there? 1989 to the present. What is it like for the Coastal Conservation League to be in existence right now?
Well, I've been thinking a lot about that, and I'm giving a little talk at the Library Society tomorrow, which amazingly is full apparently. But I'm really amazed looking back at how little I realized we would do, how little I understood about what we would do. When we started, we had 2.5 people on the staff, one office up on Upper King. Yeah. It was a totally different Upper King at the time. And I just am impressed and sort of awed by the way things proceeded in ways I had no earthly idea would happen. For example, I mean, last thing I thought I'd be doing 30 years later was selling vegetables, with Grow Food Carolina.
Right.
And yet it now seems like such a logical thing to be doing, to support local farmers and local land base for farming. But and so many things that we ended up accomplishing that we didn't really think we would undertake. We didn't even think we had to. Hog farming, for example, came up, and that was a big deal. And then the planning around the Charleston area, I think, is another thing that we did think we would undertake it, but I guess we didn't appreciate just how great the pressure would be. And it's so great now, especially the growth out I-26 around Volvo and that sort of area. Okay. So anyway, just how your life proceeds that you have when at the moment you have no earthly concept of.
You talk about farming and obviously local farmers. What is the state of that right now as we sit here?
Farming, when we started the Conservation League in '89, there was a lot of truck farming on the Sea Islands, and most of those fields were planted into tomatoes, mostly tomatoes, but also other row crop, commodity agriculture. And over the last 30 years, that has undergone a severe decline. A lot of the agriculture's moved west. A lot of it's moved out of this country. We're importing a lot more. South Carolina, less than 10% of what we eat in the state is grown in the state, which is crazy when you think about how important agriculture has been to us over 300 years and how big a producer we've been. But the new old agriculture now is working in a more localized fashion, really on smaller parcels, frankly, and getting food out to this region, to the grocery stores and to consumers, and also to the restaurants and institutions. And that's the concept behind Grow Food Carolina. But the good thing is that it's gone beyond that. Grow Food is a wonderful organization, but other distributors have now begun to do more local distribution as well. So that's it's good, but we still are just at the tip of the iceberg. You know, we really need to dramatically expand the amount of local production that we have here.
And you talked earlier about obviously having a talk tour that is right around the corner here at the Charleston Library Society. And it's basically about your book, and it's entitled A Wholly Admirable Thing.
Right.
What is that one thing that you really and wholly admire about the Coastal Conservation League?
Well, you know, it's funny you mentioned the title, because here's the book.
Yeah.
And it's published by Evening Post Press.
Oh, yeah.
And they did a great job, and Virginia wrote it, and it's a beautifully written book. And also it's got over 100 photographs in it, archival photographs.
Right.
The title comes from a quote by Brooks Atkinson, who was a theater critic with the New York Times. And he said, "Nothing wholly admirable in this country happens except the migration of birds." And we have spent a lot of time promoting bird habitat.
Right.
But more important than that, we sort of wanted to take issue with Brooks and basically say that the work that's gone on here and the people who worked, the local activists,
right.
the citizens, some of our representatives, although not enough, have been doing this work in a way that is tremendously praiseworthy. And those are the people, in a way, that we're talking about. You know, these are the ones who've really done the things that have happened to protect this landscape and to improve the quality of our communities.
What is the quality of life in Charleston right now in your mind?
I'd say it is still great. You know, we've got some good friends who live in New York and have just bought a house down here.
Okay.
And they love it. You know, people move down here. But it is very much, I'd say, on the brink of losing the things that are distinctive about it. One, it's losing, to a great extent, the downtown residential population. You know, a lot of the houses are not occupied even half of the year. The hotel explosion threatens, I think, to tip that balance between residential character and tourism. A lot of cities have gone through this, you know, Venice being the one people talk about. I've never been there, but as one that really went over the edge with tourism driving out the local residents for many reasons, you know, quality of life, too much congestion, tax increases, that sort of thing. But Charleston's on the verge, and I think if we don't do something over the next 5 years, we will lose what people love about this place. You know, it's authentic. It's got, when you walk down the street, you often see people that you know, and you know might also people whose children you know or whose parents you know. And so it's a city that has a history to it and an integrity to its sort of social fabric. And that is not something we should take for granted. I think we need to really push. The cruise ships, I think, are a real threat to that. Having these vast numbers of people disgorged and engorged for the kind of tourism that we have here. People really don't come here on these boats just to see history and ecology. They're just coming here to load and unload. So those are some of the threats that we face. But boy, have we got a great place and a worthy cause to defend.
And you talk about threats. This is something that a lot of people are really talking about right now. And I just got this news from a source just a few minutes ago. And it basically says this. They are having a press conference tomorrow on the steps of the federal courthouse, which is 1 block from here, regarding offshore drilling. And I understand that Congressman-elect Joe Cunningham will be at that particular conference as well. When you think of the debate of offshore drilling, where should that discussion go in your mind?
Well, to the great credit of the local governments, every local government on the coast has passed a resolution against it.
Right.
Many of the mayors have been involved.
Right.
Mayor Tecklenburg, Mayor Kaiserling in Beaufort.
Right.
They have all weighed in, and of course, you know, on the islands. Right. But they've weighed in And now is the time to call the question for our governor, because he's the guy who reportedly has come connection to President Trump. And he has reportedly conveyed his disapproval of offshore drilling.
Right.
But we're still on the list. And in fact, we're not only on the list, but things are moving forward inexorably, it seems, toward seismic testing. So I would say to our governor, if you've really got that strong a relationship with him, if you've got his ear, let's do something about it. Florida got pulled off the list because their governor was able to persuade Mr. Zinke that they shouldn't be on the list. So I think really when you get right down to it, it's more also than just the particulars of South Carolina or Georgia or Florida. This is not something that we should be doing at this point in our planetary trajectory. We ought to be looking for ways to be vastly more efficient, and we can with fossil fuels. We ought to cut fossil fuels eventually completely out, but certainly dramatically down compared to what we now do. And the last thing on earth we ought to be doing, I mean, it's the greatest irony, is drilling more, doing this great damage to these marine mammals with the seismic testing.
I was going to get in there. And
also drilling and putting more carbon in the atmosphere, because guess what? The reason sea levels have risen a foot here in Charleston the past century and accelerated over the last 20 years is that we are blanketing the planet with CO2 and insulating it. That's called the greenhouse effect. We used to call it that. And so we ought to be doing the opposite of going after more carbon-based fuels. We ought to be moving away from them. You know, and that's on top of all of the localized impacts of exploration and excavation. I think the good thing too, here it's been essentially a nonpartisan issue. We've had Mark Sanford, now Joe Cunningham, Chip Campson, Billy Kaiserling. I mean, a lot of people across the political partisan spectrum say this is the wrong thing for South Carolina. So where's the disconnect? That's my question.
526. It's back on the table.
The zombie rising from the dead.
It has risen from the dead for some people. Now that it's back on the table, what should be on the table as far as 526 in your mind?
Well, there was an article in the letter to the editor in the paper today by Mr. Rosenthal from Seabrook, right. and he really nailed it, I thought. He basically said, you know, this thing is not going to be built. I mean, it doesn't matter whether the SIB renegotiates the contract and they come up with some projection of how they might pay for it. We simply don't have the resources to build a project that is both unnecessary, unhelpful, and also arguably harmful. But forget even the harm for a minute. Think about it in terms of priority. This city, just this city, not Mount Pleasant, not North Charleston, but just the city of Charleston, is estimating that it will cost $2 billion to deal with flooding. And that's just based on what we know now. It could go up higher than that once the Dutch come over and tell us we need to do some more stuff. So we don't have the money to be putting in new interstates, or if we do, we're putting them in at the expense of the kind of critical infrastructure investments that will ensure the survival of the city. Forget function for a minute. I mean, literally, the physical survival of this city depends on us acting quickly and dramatically and in a comprehensive way. And that's going to mean we need every resource available to us. One of those resources is the state infrastructure bank funding, which we've already gotten some of to do some of the crosstown. But you saw in the paper today, 2 or 3 days ago, they just realize they don't have enough money to finish it. even the crosstown. We're not talking about Calhoun West project. We're not talking about a wall along Lockwood. And so I think, we can continue to go back and forth in this sort of parallel universe in which we debate whether or not we should build 526 while the city sinks into the ocean and becomes the next Atlantis. Or we can be honest about it and say, let's just move on. 526 is a bad idea. At another time, let's move on to fix the problems we've got today.
And let me be fair, and to get to the other side, they're basically saying, hey, as far as the negotiations with 526, they're going great. It's ongoing.
Right. You've heard that one before. We've heard it for over a decade. They don't have the money. I mean, there's no source of money. And the only way they could possibly get it is to raid the half-cent sales tax, which has been promised to other projects that can be done quickly, like the flyover at Main and 17. Other projects like improving the Glen McConnell. Other projects like the bus rapid transit system. And they're not going to be able to take it away from that. If they do, then, in some ways, if the public doesn't rise up against that, then perhaps we even deserve to sink into the ocean.
Where is the public poll on 526 in your mind?
I don't know. I believe, from what my sense is that there are still a fair number of people who want to see it built. Perhaps they live West Ashley. Perhaps they vote West Ashley. That's certainly on the minds of a lot of the politicians. There are a lot of people who don't want it to be built on James Island. It will cross through neighborhoods. It will destroy part of the James Island County Park. It will add a essentially interstate grade highway to a residential island. There are a lot of people on Johns Island who don't want it to be built, and some who do. Whether it's 50-50 or 20-80 or 30-70, I don't know. But that's where leadership comes in. These are big challenges for us. How do we deal with mobility and at the same time promote a flood response? And that's, frankly, I wish I could be a little more optimistic about democracy pulling these problems out of the ditch. But what we really need are leaders to pull these problems out of the ditch and to just say, look, here's the fixed amount of resources we have to deploy in this region, and here are the problems that we need to solve with those resources. Now, which ones are the priorities? And in our view, a leader would say, saving the city from essentially vanishing is vastly more important than putting, 6 or 8 more lanes of asphalt across James Island.
And let me get back to this book, A Wholly Admiring Thing. When people read this book and put it down for the night, what do you want them to say about this particular book?
Well, I hope they'll say it's been fun to read. That's the bottom line. If the book isn't any fun to read, then forget it. You can have the most valuable information in it known to man, and it ain't going to matter. And I think it's exciting. It's got some of the people, some of whom you've interviewed, some of the most colorful low-country characters. Arthur Ravenel is in here. Glen McConnell is in here. I love Glen.
He's a good guy. He's always nice to me.
These are great people, and it's got Charlie Way in.
Yes.
God, I mean, it is just great fun. It's it moves along. It's twists and turns. It's sort of how, as Disraeli said, watching legislation being made is like watching sausage being made.
Okay.
You may not want to see either one, but I think you will in the case of the hog farm regulations, for example. How that moved through the legislature's efforts on the part of the Department of the Agriculture Farm Bureau, really to try to promote massive hog farming operations in South Carolina that we all averted, thankfully, because we saw what happened in North Carolina, again, with the rain, the big rain, the spilling of the hog lagoons into the rivers, the pollution of the rivers, and probably at least long-term damage because of this massive infusion of hog feces into the rivers. that will take literally years, perhaps decades, to clear out. We avoided that in South Carolina. And we avoided it because we had some really good leaders in Columbia. And we also had a strong constituency from the PD, citizens who went up week after week and campaigned in favor of the legislation. So I think it's exciting. I think it's exciting. The Global Gateway's in there.
Okay.
You know, the fight against the railroad across Kenai Peninsula. That's what I hope. I hope people are going to read it and say, one, this was a lot of good work that was done over 30 years. Two, I'm glad I know more about it now because it's even more interesting the more details you know. And three, we can do it again with all the challenges that we face today. Because in some ways they're not that different than the ones we were dealing with in 1989.
Quickly describe to me the following one word: the City of Charleston plastic bag ban in 2020.
Visionary.
The low battery.
Inadequate.
The Glen McConnell Parkway widening.
Unfortunate.
The new Charleston County Council.
The Charleston County Council?
Yes, sir.
Well, maybe some potential, we hope.
And Governor McMaster being elected to his first full term as governor of South Carolina.
Well, I'll be optimistic about that.
Dana Beach, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate this.
Quintin, thank you. You bring up all the important issues, and you talk to, and I'm not putting me in this category, but some of the really key people, the movers and shakers, and thank you for doing that.
No problem. This is the grace of God.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.